Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liverpool.com podcast from Blood Red. I'm James Martin, your host for the week, and I'm joined by Matt Addison and Ben Bocsak. Things are looking pretty good for Liverpool in the here and now. A big win at the weekend and Chelsea dropping points. But today we're going to be talking a little bit more long term. Specifically, it's contracts on the agenda. Matt, there were a lot of renewals in the summer, but 6 players still have deals expiring in 2023 or sooner. I think we're probably all agreed that Mohamed Salah is the most alarming name on that list. Are you starting to get twitchy yet?
Not yet, I don't think. I still think there's a lot of reasons why it probably hasn't happened yet. I'm fairly confident that it will happen at some point. I think there's a number of different things that sort of make me think that. The biggest one, to be honest, is just that I think he's at the best possible place to succeed and be what he wants to be within football. Obviously, by the time people are listening to this, they'll know the outcome of the Ballon d'Or for this year, whether he wins that or not. I think that's a big ambition for him moving forwards, and I think that's something that he's in the best possible position to go on and win that in future, regardless of whether he's done it this year or not. I think he's in the perfect place to sort of win trophies, to be challenging consistently at the top end of the Champions League. I just think there's nowhere better for him to be, and I think he knows that, and I think his representatives know that. I think that's obviously quite a big reason as to why Liverpool haven't had to tie him down just yet. There's not really been too much speculation in terms of where he might go, and I think that's basically because there's not really anywhere. You can't really see him going anywhere else in England. Obviously, we know that the economic trouble in Spain with Real Madrid and even more so with Barcelona. I know there's been one or two links to Barcelona that they might be interested in him and he might be interested in going there with Xavi, but whether he is or not, I doubt that he is, but economically it just won't be feasible. And obviously PSG have got Messi, so it's a difficult one to see where he's going to go. I think it will get done eventually. I think he's absolutely deserving of what he's supposedly asking for. And yeah, I'm not worried yet. Give it another 6 months and I might be, but right now I'm okay with it.
Fair enough. And Ben, could there ever be any justification for cashing in? I know that Salah is sort of the most kind of cut and dried one on the list in terms of what every fan wants. Is there any bid that could come in which would sort of turn your head?
No, I think he's the best player in the world. Like, you'd be crazy to sell the best player in the world. You look at how Real Madrid and Barcelona were impacted by the departures of Ronaldo and Messi, and they haven't been able to replace them. Maybe Real Madrid are getting closer now with Vinicius Jr. He's doing all right, but Barcelona are in disarray, and you don't want Liverpool to end up in the same place as them. So as long as you got Salah, you got to keep him.
Yeah, emphatic answer. I think pretty much every Liverpool fan would be inclined to agree. I suppose the only thing, Matt, is in terms of the age profile, and if you do renew these players, then you're left with the question of where are you getting the funds from to sort of renew that in future. We know that FSG are kind of sell to buy sustainable club model, so someone's going to have to go. And with that in mind, how different is the situation of Sadio Mane to that of Salah?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think you kind of have to look at the front three as a three rather than individually almost. I think at least two of those, if not all three, will get new deals because, particularly with Salah and to an extent with Sadio Mane as well, I think it would be a lot more costly to try and replace those players than it would be just to extend them and keep them. I think obviously there's a bit of doubt in people's heads because you look at Gini Wijnaldum, obviously he sort of turned 30, 31 and suddenly Liverpool decided they couldn't go forward with that. But I think with the front three, it's slightly different. I think obviously Sadio Mane is not at the same level as Salah at this moment in time, but it's not that long ago that there was a kind of conversation of, is Mane better than him? Is he, at the same level? I think that was a fair one at the time. He's maybe dropped off a little bit since then. I think he's changed his game a little bit. Both of them really are players that you think they've got at least sort of 3 or 4 years left at the level that they're at now, particularly Salah. But Mane as well, there's no reason why he can't become a player that plays through the middle. There's no reason why he can't become someone who basically, as he has this season, has not been quite as explosive or maybe quite as, the the ability to kind of stop and start and beat players and be the kind of Sadio Mane that he was when he was 22, 23. But even without that pace, he's still got the ability to find the back of the net. I think he's already into double figures for goal contributions. He's obviously a hugely talented player. So for me, Mohamed Salah is by a million miles the priority. But I think Sadio Mane has to be there as well. I think, obviously, you look at the other players on the list, there's no one that compares to Salah, but I think he's the closest in terms of the importance of tying him down, because finding another version of Sadio Mane, I know there's lots of names that get linked, there's lots of different profiles that you could look at. Obviously, we all sort of do that and dream about certain players, but I think when it came to it, to actually find someone who was cost effective, who could put down the same sort of numbers, who knows the Liverpool system as well as he does, and can play in a couple of different positions as well, it's not quite as easy as that. So yeah, I can see Sadio Mane signing as well. The question mark for me comes, it's 2 out of 3. Salah is one of them, and it's kind of a bit of a guess between Firmino and Mane, to be honest.
Yeah, and I suppose when you're looking at that debate, Ben, you have to ask the sort of realistic question of which one, if any, is the market there for. And I suppose perhaps Mane has that slightly more kind of resale value aspect to him. Do you think the market exists for these kind of players anymore, or are Liverpool just so close to the top of the game that there's just a handful of clubs who even have that money to spend? And I suppose on that similar topic, what price would be tempting, if any, for Mane? So the same question I gave you for Salah.
It's a difficult one, because I think right now with the pandemic, you saw City spend 100 million, but do we want to sell Mane to Manchester City for 100 million? I don't think we will. So I suppose there is still probably a market there. It's just very niche, and there's only very few amounts of clubs who can spend that kind of money to prize someone like Mane away. And those clubs probably all play in England. In all fairness, you struggle to find any outside of England, and you don't really want to see Mane playing for another English club as well. And on top of that, as well, like, if you were a club interested in Sadio Mane and you saw that his contract is running out in a year's time, would you not just wait a year, wait till his contract expires and sign him for a free? And I think that's the difficult part. I think once there's only a year or so left of a player's contract, it's difficult to sell them on for the right kind of price, the kind of price where you would be able to find an adequate replacement, someone who is of the same quality. So I think that's the main issue there. And then your question between Firmino and Mane, I think I'd keep Mane as well. But I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a tough one because Mane probably, like you say, probably has a bit of a resale value, whereas Firmino is a slightly older, and you also have Diogo Jota in the Liverpool team now.
I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of years in terms of transfers, actually, because I think the sort of times when I think Eden Hazard only had 12 months left on his contract and goes for 100 million, I think decisions like that are not going to be made anymore. And I think you look at someone like Raheem Sterling at Manchester City, for example. He obviously wants out because he's not getting enough game time. I know he's played a couple of matches recently, but before that, there was kind of speculation about where he might go. Obviously, links with Liverpool. Well, the chances of that happening are probably quite slim. The chances of City wanting to let him go to another English club are quite slim. But then there's not really anywhere else. As I said before, PSG have got Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar. Obviously, if they lose one of those players, then maybe they come in for one of them. But there's so many players in that kind of category. Look at Chelsea as well. I mean, all of the attacking options that they've got. Someone like Christian Pulisic, for example, has been linked with various different clubs. But there's just so many of these kind of number 10s, wingers, attacking players with loads of quality. Sadio Mane, Raheem Sterling, Pulisic, loads of others as well. But they can't all move at the same time. There just isn't the sort of room for those. So I don't know. I wonder if we might see, particularly with the pandemic, maybe one or two more of these players just running their contracts down and moving on a free than possibly we might have expected 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has really sort of accelerated what we were starting to see anyway, in the sense that you've got these kind of big old money clubs who were already maybe struggling a little bit to keep up with the big financial injections of the likes of City and PSG, and the pandemic has kind of pushed them over the edge and taken them off the table when you're looking at places Liverpool could potentially sell to. And then with new money, like that money has been invested in kind of smart recruitment more than anything else. You don't have these clubs with just money to burn anymore, where Real Madrid would go and spend, like you say, 100 million on an aging contract left to run Hazard. It's just, it doesn't feel like that's going to happen anymore. And then with the teams who do have that kind of money, your Cities, your PSGs, that they're a little bit smarter. Then they're not going to spend that on someone who's 29, 30. It would take something remarkable for them to decide that's worth doing. It's different when the player's already at the club and you think, okay, they've still got some years in the tank. It makes sense to renew them. But you're not going to come out and spend those big transfer fees, which is it's kind of at the heart of the problem, and potentially why FSG have left themselves with quite a lot to do, leaving all of the front three this late in terms of the renewal process. I don't think anyone would really have believed it, Ben, if you'd said just even a year ago that all of Salah, Mane and Firmino would be allowed to run down into the final 18 months of their deals without any movement. We've touched upon it briefly earlier, but do you think the fact that Firmino is those sort of few months older than the other two is going to make a decisive difference?
Perhaps not the age, but I think it's more so the fact that you have someone like Diego Jota in there who can play in that number 9 position, so he's less of a priority. Whereas with Mane and Salah, it's only really them who can play in the right wing and the left wing positions at Liverpool at the moment. So with Firmino, I guess he's more disposable. But on top of that as well, I guess maybe his wage demands would be the least out of Mane and Salah to extend. So I think it's a real conundrum for FSG, and it's going to be interesting to see who they go with in the end. For me, I think Firmino is the one who I least worry about getting older in terms of age. Maybe injuries might come into effect, but in terms of his playing style and his ability on the pitch, I think he's the one who uses pace the least. He's more of a technical player, and for that reason, I think he's someone who I could see him sustaining a sort of similar level for a longer period than maybe a Mane or a Salah.
And we'll move on from the front three shortly, but just finally on this, Matt, like there's been some talk that it's kind of an audition, if you like, between, well, certainly Mane and Firmino to decide who stays and who goes. Do you think FSG are really thinking in that sort of perspective, or do you think they've really seen enough in terms of the last few years and know broadly what they want to do already?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think Firmino, for me, would be the most likely not to sign, just in terms of a couple of reasons, really. One is that you wouldn't get as much money for him. But again, similar, obviously, there's not a huge market for Salah and Mane at this moment in time. But I don't think there's a massive market really for Firmino either. I know there was about 12 months ago, or maybe a bit longer, there was kind of links with Atletico Madrid, and maybe they might be interested. And I suppose I could see that. Possibly if PSG decided that actually they could do with being a bit more of a team rather than 3 individuals, possibly he could sort of help mould that kind of team and put them into a bit of a better shape. But I don't know, that there just doesn't seem to be another big move in it for Firmino for me. I think he's the one that if it got down to the last 12 months, the last 6 months even of his contract, and he was still playing, the injuries hadn't been particularly bad, he was still kind of playing possibly more of a rotation and a squad role by that point. I think you could leave that late and still convince him to sign up. I think possibly with Salah and Mane, if you left it to the last 12 months, they might sort of take that possibly in a little bit more of a kind of a sort of show of maybe you're not quite convinced of them. Maybe there'd be a bit more of an ego that would come into it. I kind of feel like with Roberto Firmino, you could kind of let that one drift a little bit and sort it out a little bit later, and he kind of wouldn't care too much. It wouldn't be a massive issue, whereas possibly with the other two, there might be a little bit more noise around them, a little bit more in terms of other clubs being interested, which obviously plays into that as well. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think I think it'd be interesting to see the order of the players as well. If Mane signs before Salah or Salah signs before Mane, whichever way around it's going to be, unless they did it at the exact same time, which would be quite interesting. But if it is one before the other, as you'd expect it to be, it'd be very interesting to kind of see the reaction and the stories around that as well. The kind of narrative of why have they done one before the other would be quite interesting. So it's going to be an interesting few months. But by the end of this season, I think if they are going to sign those two down, possibly Firmino as well, it's kind of got to be done before the end of this year, because particularly Salah and Mane, you don't really want them going into the last year of the deal with that sort of speculation. And imagine next summer with 1 year left on Mohamed Salah's contract, it'd just be relentless, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely another podcast in that if that's the situation we find ourselves in. But yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully we don't have to record that show. Hopefully we just have to do one celebrating the new deals for at least Salah and Mane, hopefully the whole trio. But one player who Liverpool can't sort of wait and see on, Ben, is James Milner, briefly stepping away from the kind of 2023 contract apocalypse. You've got this one, which runs out next summer. So FSG have some urgency in making their mind up there. He can theoretically negotiate with other clubs from the start of January, so just over a month away now. Should Liverpool offer him one more year, or has he run his course?
I mean, I think with Milner, it's not just his ability on the pitch that's important. You know, he's a key character in the dressing room, and I think you see him the way he is with younger players, like Harvey Elliott, for example, mentioned how he was very helpful when he was integrated into the first team. So I don't suppose he's on high wages at Liverpool, and it probably, for me, the ideal situation would be to keep Milner for another year as a player/manager, sort of a coach type deal, and kind of help him progress into that role. But then again, knowing Milner, he knows he might believe in himself that he can play another full season of professional football, and he might be looking for more game time. And with his contract running out, he's free to leave. And I know Leeds United is his homegrown club, and if they're looking for a player, I think it'll kind of be a fairy tale ending to his career, and you wouldn't blame him for leaving on a free. But I do think it's time for Liverpool to sort of start preparing for life after James Milner, and finding someone who can be that versatile player in Jurgen Klopp's squad.
Matt, I don't think anyone would be arguing with James Milner if he said he felt he had another season in him. I think he's shown that he's certainly got the fitness to keep up with. I mean, even Klopp's system, he doesn't look out of place, even if the years are catching up with him. But the idea of transitioning into a coaching role, I think, is an interesting one. Do you see those kind of attributes in Milner as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think that'd be the way to go about it. I think there will come a point where injuries kind of take over, and he can't. Obviously, he's never, in most of his time at Liverpool, really been able to play sort of 3 games a week. There's never really been the opportunity to do that because there's other players around him. But 100%, I'd be keeping him around as a kind of, a backup option, someone that can be plugged in at right back if needs be. Can obviously play left back. Obviously, Liverpool have got a couple of players in there, so he is obviously very useful. Played as a number 9 in the Champions League the other day, so he's pretty much ticked off every position going. But yeah, in terms of the coaching thing, I think probably if he does sign, there will be some sort of arrangement in terms of that kind of thing. I can certainly see him being interested in staying around the game, and I think he could obviously go and maybe play for a club like Leeds. I'm not quite sure whether he maybe would be able to keep up with the Marcelo Bielsa style of play. I think the Leeds links were maybe a little bit before he came in, and maybe have tailed off a little bit now. I think there's certainly clubs where he could go and play sort of once a week and be regular. But I think if you are going to be a coach, there's probably not too much of a better place to be really than Liverpool. The expertise that they've got, you can work. Obviously, he's worked with coaches at Manchester City, but at Liverpool, he's been there with Jurgen Klopp. He could sort of integrate himself into that. even the other people around him. You think of all the sort of Pep Linders and Mito Matos and all of these other coaches. They are, absolutely elite within what they do. I think it would be the perfect environment if you wanted to learn to be a coach, as Steven Gerrard obviously found when he was at Liverpool. I think there's a real pathway in terms of that. If that's something that he wants to do, I think that's something that he will have that conversation with Jurgen Klopp about, because, like I say, there's not really, he could go maybe to a team elsewhere in the Premier League. He could go and play every week for, I don't know, Southampton or someone like that. But longer term, if he's thinking seriously about becoming a coach, I think it might just be best to stay where he is.
Yeah, a good point about Gerrard's grounding as well. He started very promisingly, both at Villa and in the sort of broader managerial career. But on the pitch, the man who inherited his shirt, Ben, is maybe not quite having such a good time of things. He started the season promisingly, Naby Keita, but he's another one in that 2023 contract expiry boat. And he's become a bit of an albatross for Liverpool, hasn't he? In the sense that the club would take a massive loss on any sale at this point. But then renewing his deal would see him continue to take up space on the wage bill for what we kind of have to accept now are limited returns on the pitch, just purely because of that injury record. Do you see any way out of that dilemma for club and player alike?
It's a difficult one. I mean, your heart is always with Naby Keita and it wants to say yes, but your brain just can't overlook that injury record. And it looked like he was finally getting over it, and it was in great form earlier in the season, but we haven't seen him for a while now with an injury, and it's a difficult one. I think if there was an extension, it wouldn't be a long extension. It would be a 1 or 2 year extension on his contract, because you can't see Naby Keita signing a long-term deal with the club. And if Liverpool were to give him, an extra year on his contract, I think that would make sense, just because you don't want to make such a big financial loss on such a big investment, especially because Naby Keita is kind of, when fit, he is the perfect player for Jurgen Klopp's system. His energy and the way he plays in that number 8 role is tailor-made for Klopp's gegenpress. And when he's at his best, we've seen Liverpool play some brilliant stuff, particularly against Manchester United this season. But for me, it's a dilemma, but I wouldn't hesitate if Liverpool were able to give him a 1 or 2 year contract extension.
Yeah, I think most people would be able to get behind that, purely because, as you say, the alternative is just kind of letting it run out. It's hard to see anyone coming in with any sizable bid. And he is still only 26. So I suppose we've been talking around it, Matt, but the kind of question at the heart of it is it unrealistic to think Naby Keita's Liverpool career can still come good? So I'll put that to you now.
Yeah, again, it's one that you're desperate for that to happen, because, as Ben says, he's basically the perfect midfielder for what Jurgen Klopp wants. I think, obviously, there's been concerns, quite rightly, over his fitness and his injury record. And I think I'm right in saying he's still not managed to start 3 consecutive games for Liverpool. And, he's been here three years or so now. So it's obviously a big concern. It's a big sort of question mark over him. But I actually think the way he'd started this season was enough actually to convince me that it would be worth having him as a squad player, as an option moving forward. I think the fact that he is still only 26 massively plays into his hands as well. I think you look at Liverpool's midfield generally, and there's not really anybody in that middle bracket. It's either Harvey Elliott, teenager, or it's Thiago Henderson, James Milner, obviously significantly further down the line in his career. I think Keita, the fact that he is kind of in that middle bracket, it will really help Liverpool in terms of, if they keep him, they sign him up to a new deal. Again, it doesn't have to be 5 years. It doesn't have to be, a huge wage increase. It can be, similar to what he was on at the moment, purely because there's not going to be a queue of clubs lining up to take him from Liverpool. I think I've kind of seen enough to kind of sense really that it would be a nice sort of bridge. Liverpool are going to have to do a bit of work on the midfield, I think, next summer. I think there's got to be at least one, possibly two signings in that kind of area just to shore things up, add a bit more depth, kind of address what I mentioned before about the sort of age profile of them. I think if you lost Keita next summer and decided to sell him or decided that you were just going to let his contract run down, I think it's just another hole that would have to be plugged. I think they need one or two. If you're starting to say, well, maybe James Milner will move on, obviously Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain will come to shortly. I just think you can't overhaul it all at once, and it might just make more sense with Keita. Not just off the back of obviously the fact that he's played quite well at times this season. I think obviously the Manchester United game, he was good. He played the full game against Watford when Liverpool were excellent. There's been enough evidence there, I think, to suggest that he's got something. Jurgen Klopp's put him in big games. He's played him in, all the opportunities he's had to put him in. Real Madrid last season, and it didn't go well, but the fact that Klopp put him in there was interesting. Obviously, this season he was on the bench for Chelsea and Manchester City, but he's played in other big games and performed well. So there is still a level of trust there. And even if he's only fit for 50% of the games moving forward, I still think there's enough quality there, and he's at a good enough age, and he's done, when he's been on the pitch, a very good job. I think it tends to sort of point to me towards an extension. And of course, as you say, Liverpool spent a lot of money on him, and to lose him for free, I think, would be slightly embarrassing.
And you mentioned Oxlade-Chamberlain there. He's the kind of last of the set, if you like. He's also another one sort of in that middle bracket, which you referred to. He's a couple of years older than Naby Keita, but still a couple of years younger than the likes of Thiago, Henderson. So again, that puts him in that sort of tricky position. I suppose if we'd been having this conversation even a month or two ago, Ben, we'd probably have been saying, no, it's not worked out. Let's move him on. But he's given a couple of reminders of his strengths lately. Is that enough to prompt a question over renewal for you?
I don't think so. I think I'm still in the mindset that if an offer comes in for him in the summer, and if it's a fairly decent offer, I think Arsenal were linked with him in the past, I'd accept it, just because Liverpool are a club who sell to buy. And if we do need to sell someone to buy someone, then Oxlade-Chamberlain kind of fits the profile. He's not too old just yet. It's only 1 year left on his contract, so perfect time to cash out. And I think with his injury record and everything else, I think it's kind of the time now to part ways with him. Even though I don't he has been very good. I will admit that in the past few games he has been impressive. But I think Liverpool have better options in that midfield when everyone's fit, and I'd rather help sort of bring Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott through than continue to play Chamberlain. And with Chamberlain as well, I think one of the most important things for him is he needs regular and constant game time. He needs to be in the rhythm and the pace of the game. And if he doesn't get that, which he's not guaranteed at Liverpool, then I don't think he will see his best side. And for those reasons, I think the summer would be an ideal time to just cash out.
Yeah, I think in terms of a bid in the summer, you'd probably be in the majority there in terms of thinking, okay, he's had a good run, but let's cash in if there's a bid there. I suppose the more interesting question is what happens if someone goes for him in January. Matt, there's obviously slightly more logistical problems there in terms of Liverpool are going to struggle to get in another body in the January market. Also, Harvey Elliott will be on his way back, but perhaps not quite there yet. You've got Keita off to the African Cup of Nations, but equally, it could be the last time where a decent price is on the table. It's the last January market where he's going to have any value at all. So if say an Arsenal tables a bid come January, what do you reckon the club do?
I don't think they can afford to accept it, to be honest. I don't think they can let him go. Obviously, you mentioned their Keita going off to AFCON. I think we might see a bit more of Oxlade-Chamberlain in the front three as well. Obviously, Salah and Mane both away. There's a couple of League Cup games potentially in there. There's FA Cup ties, potentially two of those. I think these are games that Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain would look at and think that he should be playing for Liverpool. He almost certainly will get, a decent run of matches in that month. Now, maybe they get to the end of the month and Salah and Mane are back and an offer comes in on transfer deadline day. Possibly that would change it, but I still think it would just be too much of a risk to let him go at this point. I think a few months ago, if, maybe the Harvey Elliott injury hadn't happened, maybe Curtis Jones hadn't been out, maybe Naby Keita had managed to stay fit, I think maybe there's a conversation around potentially copying what Manchester United did last January with Jesse Lingard, for example, and loaning him out, bumping up the value and then sort of cashing in the summer. But I just don't think Liverpool have enough bodies there. We've spoken plenty of times about the midfield not being quite at the level it needs to be in terms of the volume of players. Obviously, that's improved significantly in the last couple of weeks. The injury situation looks a lot better, but it can very quickly fall apart again. So, yeah, I can't see him leaving. In fact, I think he'll play a lot more over the next couple of months. And potentially by next summer, it might be the time to move on. But in January, I just can't see that happening.
Yeah, that was a bizarre one from Manchester United that you mentioned there. They managed to manufacture the one kind of situation where Jesse Lingard has market value again, and then promptly renewed his deal and didn't sell him, which seemed odd. And yeah, his value's only gone down this season, barely played at all. You hope that Liverpool will be a little bit smarter with their business over the next year or so. They've got a lot of big decisions to make. They'll now be overseen by Julian Ward, at least from the summer, once Michael Edwards moves on. It's a big test for him. It's a big test for Liverpool. But all we can do is hope that the FSG make the right calls. There's a lot of decisions to make, and we've hopefully shed some light on what might happen, but really it's anyone's guess. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. If you disagree on what should be done with any of the players, of course, let us know in the comments below. And we hope you tune in next week for the next Liverpool.com podcast. Thank you very much.